Thank you, Speaker. When you think about the terrible policy initiatives put forward by this Liberal government over the last decade, this banning of gasoline vehicles, it ranks in like the top 5, and I'll explain exactly why. In law, we would call this gross negligence, because they know what they're doing is wrong and it's negligent, but they continue to do it anyways. And of course, if we could take them to court over this, they would lose on a charge of gross negligence, absolutely. And I'm going to point out and explain exactly why. When you look at where we are in Canada right now, we are at about 8 to 10% of new vehicles are being purchased as EVs. That is, of course, with the subsidies that have been in place. My colleague just explained those subsidies have dried up, and yet next year in 2026, Canadians are expected to go to 20%, so more than double in 1 year. Now, that is an enormous challenge right now, given that the average EV is about $20,000 more than its comparable gas-powered vehicle. So we're at a time of unprecedented cost of living crisis, where we have 1 million Ontarians regularly using the food bank, which is 3 times more than it was a decade ago. That's the economic record of this government. Now they're going to say to Canadians, you have to spend $20,000 more just to get your new vehicle. That's just for next year, but it gets worse. By 2030, which is a mere 5 years away, it's going to be 60%. So we're going to go from 8 to 10% this year to 60% by 2030. That is 6 times the amount. How is that even remotely possible? And they know it's not possible, and yet they're continuing to drive forward on this. Now, that is because the current Prime Minister is just as obsessed as Justin Trudeau with this kind of agenda, with this impossible agenda on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So let's talk and break down a couple of the things on this. This is the epitome of ideology over fact and ideology over reality. Number one, it's going to cost an estimate by the Canadian Journal of Economics 38,000 manufacturing jobs in the auto sector. That is a devastating blow that would happen as a result of a policy that they know is not possible. But they're driving ahead anyways. You know, damn the torpedoes, we're going ahead because it doesn't matter. We are ideologically obsessed with this, and the consequences to Canadians, that just doesn't matter. It doesn't even factor in for them. So when you look at this, and then 100% by 2035, a mere decade away. Now, the consequences of this to Canadians are you are not going to be able to buy a gas-powered vehicle. So when we go to 60% in a mere 5 years, you go to that dealership and say, well, I'm a farmer and I want to replace my diesel pickup truck. And they say, sorry, we've sold all the diesel pickup trucks we're allowed to sell this year. You can't get one. Imagine that's the consequence for you. Now, if there was a readily available charging network in Canada, you might say that this makes sense. But A, there isn't. B, they have no plan to create the charging network. And C, who's going to pay for it? There was a report put out by RBC. It's called the $2 trillion Path to Net Zero, because this government is ideologically obsessed with net zero, no matter what the harmful consequences are to Canadians. I had the privilege of being the Shadow Minister for the Environment at the time, and I asked the Deputy Minister of Environment at committee, how much will it cost to build out the charging network in Canada, the electric generation in Canada, and the increases to electric transmission in Canada to get to these zero-emission vehicle mandates? Do you know what the answer was? I have no idea. We haven't calculated it. So when you talk about gross negligence, that's the example. They're driving forward with an ideologically driven mandate that is going to be harmful for Canadians. They don't know how they're going to get there, and they don't know how much it's going to cost. I mean, this is the direct definition of negligence, and they don't care. They're driving forward with it. When you think about how they have to get there, so first of all, they've set the charging network at a capacity that is higher per car usage than California or the EU. So you calculate the number of charging stations you need for a vehicle. They've said in Canada, a cold country, we need less chargers per vehicle than California does. This in of itself is negligence. Then you look at where they are to the build-out of the charging network. Even with their modest goals, which will not create the charging network that Canadians need, they are at about 10% of their goals. Are they changing the mandates? No, they are not. This is gross negligence. It is going to have catastrophic consequences for Canadians who are going to be forced to buy these vehicles and then have nowhere to charge them. How can a government continue like this? How can members of this Liberal Party support this? Many of them have rural ridings where there will be no charging network, and their constituents, their voters, the people they're supposed to represent, they're going to be forced to buy these vehicles. And so this is not a zero-emission vehicle mandate. This is a ban on gasoline vehicles. Let's call it for what it is. It's a ban on buying a gasoline vehicle regardless of the consequence. You don't have a charging network that you can go to? Too bad. You have to buy an electric vehicle. This is the consequences of the kinds of things they're talking about. So, when we look at number one, we do not have the electric generating capacity to do this across the country. It takes 10 to 15 years to permit and develop new electricity generation. So somehow we have to massively increase our electricity demand for all of the electric vehicles that are going to have to be charged, plus heat pumps, but there's no plan to actually increase the amount of electricity we're going to generate. Again, this is gross negligence, or it's an absolute denial of reality. So then we go there. What's the cost of that? No one knows, Mr. Speaker, because I asked the Deputy Minister of the Environment at committee how much it would cost, and he said, basically, I have no idea. We haven't calculated that out to the end point. Okay, so now let's move to electricity transmission. And there's two aspects of that. There's the transmission across the country, which will have to be massively increased. How much will that cost? They have no idea. Does the Ministry of the Environment have an idea? No, because I asked and they don't know. Then you get to local transmission. So if everybody on my street in the town of Orangeville were to decide we're going to install an electric vehicle charger, because remember, in 5 years, 60% of the people on my street are going to have an electric vehicle, the local transmission can't handle that capacity. So again, it doesn't just get downloaded from the federal government. That means there's going to have to be improvements made to Orangeville Hydro for local transmission. How much is that going to cost? Nobody knows. Do the Liberals know? No, they don't. Do they seem to care? No, they don't. So these gasoline-powered vehicle bans that they're coming forward with are completely ideologically driven with no plan. Now, I've seen them come up with things where they have a plan on the back of a napkin, but at least it's a plan. It's a terrible plan. They drew it up in about 10 seconds, and that's how they govern often. But on this, there's absolutely no plan. No plan to build the electric generation capacity. No plan to build the electric transmission capacity. No plan to build the local electricity generation capacity. So, this is where we are. Now, what have some of the CEOs of the auto companies said about this? Bev Goodman, CEO of Ford Canada, called for the EV mandates to be repealed. Christina Aquilina, president of General Motors, urged the Liberals to scrap the EV mandates. It's unrealistic to believe the country is going to go from 5 or 6% to 20% by 2026, which starts now. Okay, so the auto manufacturers have said these mandates are unrealistic, they're impossible to achieve. They don't know the cost of the electricity generation cost or how they're going to get there. They don't know how they're going to get there on transmission or local transmission. They've set the EV charging network standards way lower than California, way lower than the EU. So more cars per charger for chargers they haven't built. And yet they're refusing to cancel these gas vehicle bans. Why? Because they are ideology over reality. And the only people that are going to be hurt by this, Mr. Speaker, are Canadians who are already suffering from a cost of living crisis, an inflationary crisis, a housing crisis. They can't afford it. Conservatives will cancel these mandates. Why won't the Liberals get on side?
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've heard arguments, simply no alternatives, prohibitive costs, no reason to prohibit. Those were actually arguments against phasing out tetraethyl leaded gasoline. And we've heard arguments about stealing freedom. People should have the right to choose for themselves. Those are arguments against seatbelt laws that were used back in the day. So yes, government should govern judiciously. Creating new rules should not be the instinct immediately. But I think we can agree we have a role in setting the floor. So my question to the member is, what should that floor be, and does the member have a counter-proposal short of doing nothing?
The Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
It's amazing. He has the opportunity to respond to the real valid criticisms that have been raised, that we don't have the electric generating capacity, we don't have the transmission capacity, we don't have the local transmission capacity, we don't have the EV charging network in place, and the CEOs of the companies are also saying we can't reach these mandates. His answer is to say, well, there were some other issues that were dealt with a generation ago, why can't we deal with this? Deal with the facts. What is the cost of doing this? You have no idea. What is the cost of the transmission network? You have no idea. What is the charge of the cost of the charging network? You have no idea. Will you reach any of these things before the mandates come in? No. Mr. Speaker, they have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. It's ideology over reality.
Before I go to questions and comments, just a reminder to members, through the chair has, in fact, no ideas about this debate. La députée pour Shefford.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I have a question for him. In Quebec, well, once again, today's debate shows that in Quebec we have a much greener vision of the upcoming transition to reduce emissions, which will ultimately save us billions in public health, in insurance, in infrastructure that is affected by climate events. So when you look at the fact that there is an organization called Mobilité Électrique Canada, an organization that has increasingly developed its expertise, we know that increasing standards for EV will not reduce the number of jobs in the auto sector. It's actually technological development that might cause a loss of jobs, because currently we're not doing enough R&D. If instead of investing in the oil sector, why not actually support producers to be able to produce high-tech EVs?
Caledon.
Well, first of all, I will trust the estimates by the Canadian Journal of Economics over the company that she cited with respect to economic loss. Look, the fact of the matter is there's an old expression which says putting the cart before the horse. And this is what's happening here. We do not have a plan for the electric generation. We do not have a plan for transmission of electricity. We do not have a plan for local electricity transmission. We do not have a plan for charging networks. When you don't have any of that stuff, which is required for a mandate, how can you proceed with the mandates? That's the problem. There's been no thinking, no thought done by this government on how to implement these mandates. And the only result of this is going to be increased suffering from Canadians who are already suffering as a result of the economic policies of this Liberal government for the last 10 years.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, and happy to join this debate. And we actually had the member out in Saskatchewan last summer, and we met with Everest steel workers, pipe fitters, building and trades, refinery workers, and not once did EV mandates come up in any of our conversations. And he was able to see our province. It's vast, beautiful, long distances, not a lot of charging stations and availability to charge these EV vehicles. My one question is, who do you think has asked for the EV mandate? I wonder who the Liberals have talked to that has actually asked for this policy to come forward.
Well, member for Dufferin-Caledon.
I wish they'd talk to someone. And I would say we had a great trip out there, met with the great unionized steel workers and others who build this country from coast to coast. I don't think they've talked to anyone. Because when you look at the facts that I've pointed out repeatedly, they do not have a plan. And they need a plan for the fundamental aspects of making a zero-emission vehicle for Canadians to actually be able to drive it and charge it. And they have no plan for that. So, as I say, this is 100% Liberal ideology over reality.